My name is Frank Henderson. I'm 63 years old, and for 35 of those years, I was a sheriff's deputy up in Davidson County. I've seen my share of things that make you question people, sure, but not things that make you question the very ground you stand on. Not until that October, 3 years ago. We'd bought a little cabin out in Hickman County, tucked away at the end of a long gravel road that was more creek bed than path. It was supposed to be our place to unwind, to get away from the noise and the memories that a long career in law enforcement leaves branded on your soul. It was our slice of peace, or so we thought. The cabin itself was nothing special, but it was ours. Built from solid pine logs, probably 50 years old, with a wide, covered porch that looked out over a deep ravine. The woods out there were old and thick. Towering oaks and hickories formed a dense canopy that kept the forest floor in a perpetual state of twilight, even at noon. It was the kind of place where you could sit on the porch swing with a cup of coffee and not hear a single man-made sound for an entire day. Just the wind in the trees, the chatter of squirrels, and the distant call of a hawk. My wife Sarah, she loved it. She'd spend hours tending to her little wildflower garden she'd carved out of the rocky soil near the porch. For her, it was heaven. For me, it was quiet. That particular weekend started like any other. We drove out on a Friday afternoon, the truck rattling over the familiar ruts in the gravel road. We unpacked our supplies. Sarah put some chili on the stove to simmer, and I went out to split some wood for the fireplace. The air was crisp, carrying that distinct earthy smell of autumn leaves and damp soil. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple through the latticework of bare branches. It was perfect. We ate dinner, listened to an old country station on the battery-powered radio, and turned in early. There was a comfortable routine to it all, a predictability that I had come to cherish after a lifetime of responding to unpredictable violence. The first sign that something was wrong came late Saturday morning. I was out on the porch, cleaning my old Remington 870. It was more habit than necessity. I just liked the familiar weight of the steel, the smell of the cleaning oil, the methodical process of breaking it down and putting it back together. Sarah was inside, humming to herself as she kneaded dough for bread. And then I noticed it. The silence. It wasn't the usual quiet of the woods. This was a dead silence. The squirrels weren't chattering. The blue jays weren't squabbling in the treetops. Even the constant, low hum of insects seemed to have vanished. It was like someone had thrown a thick, heavy blanket over the entire forest. I lowered the shotgun barrel and just listened, straining my ears. Nothing. The air was perfectly still, not even a breeze stirred the leaves. I've spent thousands of hours in the woods, hunting and hiking, and I know that nature is never truly silent. There's always some sound, some movement. This was different. This was an absence of sound, a heavy, listening silence that made the hairs on my arms stand up. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something. I told myself it was just a predator nearby, maybe a bobcat or a coyote pack on the move, something that had put all the smaller critters on high alert. It was a logical explanation. It was the kind of explanation a man like me reaches for. It just didn't feel right. Sarah came out onto the porch, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. "What's wrong, Frank?" she asked. She knew my tells better than anyone. She saw the way I was holding the shotgun, the way my eyes were scanning the tree line. "It's too quiet," I said, my voice low. She listened for a moment, her head tilted. "You're right," she whispered. "I didn't even notice until you said it. It's empty." We stood there together for a few minutes, two people on a porch, surrounded by a vast, silent wilderness that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage.
Then, as if a switch was flipped, a crow cawed angrily from a distant ridge, and the spell was broken. The squirrels started their frantic chasing again. The normal sounds of the forest slowly seeped back in, but the feeling of wrongness lingered, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. Later that afternoon, I decided to take a walk down to the creek at the bottom of the ravine. I needed to check the trail camera I'd set up a few weeks prior, hoping to get a picture of the big buck I'd seen tracks for.
I told Sarah I'd be back in an hour, grabbed my sidearm out of habit, and headed down the narrow path that snaked through the trees. The woods felt different. The oppressive silence was gone, but there was still a tension in the air, a feeling of being watched that I couldn't shake. I've felt that before, usually right before an ambush or a raid. It's a primal instinct, and mine was screaming at me. When I got to the creek, I saw the first piece of physical evidence that this wasn't just my nerves playing tricks on me. There were tracks in the soft, muddy bank. They were huge. I wear a size 12 boot, and these prints dwarfed mine. At first, I thought, bear. It was the only thing that made sense. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. A bear track is distinct, almost flat-footed, with 5 clear toe impressions and claw marks. These were different. They were elongated, more like a canine's, but impossibly large. There was a clear impression of a heel and a ball of the foot, and 4, maybe 5 toe pads. And the claws, the marks they left were deep, thick gouges in the mud, longer and heavier than any black bear I'd ever tracked. But the most unsettling thing was the stride. The tracks were in a straight line, one directly in front of the other. It was a bipedal gait, an animal that big, walking on 2 legs. I followed the tracks for about 50 yards as they paralleled the creek. The stride was immense, easily 6 or 7 feet between prints. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A prank? Someone with costume feet walking through the woods? It seemed absurd. Who would come all the way out here, miles from any paved road, for a joke? And the depth of the prints. Whatever made them had to have a significant weight, far more than a man in a costume. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, my boot next to one of the tracks for scale. The image on the screen looked like something out of a monster movie. I walked back to the cabin slowly, my hand resting on the grip of my pistol. Every shadow seemed to move, every snap of a twig made me jump. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. When I got back, Sarah could tell immediately that something was wrong. I showed her the pictures on my phone. Her face went pale. "Frank, what is that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I thought it was a bear at first, but it's walking on 2 legs, Sarah." We stood in the kitchen, the comforting smell of baking bread doing little to calm our nerves. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, and the woods outside were growing dark. The familiar, cozy cabin suddenly felt very small and very isolated. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I lay in bed, my shotgun propped against the nightstand, and listened. Around midnight, I heard it, a sound from deep in the woods. It wasn't a howl or a growl, not at first. It was a low, guttural, chuffing sound, like a huge animal clearing its throat. It was followed by a deep, resonant growl that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards of the cabin. It was a sound of immense power and aggression, a sound that bypassed the ears and went straight to the oldest, most primitive part of your brain, the part that knows what a predator sounds like. Sarah was awake too, her hand gripping my arm so tightly her knuckles were white. "What was that?" she breathed. "Stay here," I said, slipping out of bed.
I moved through the dark cabin, my bare feet silent on the cold wood floors. I went to the living room window that faced the porch and the ravine beyond. The moon was nearly full, casting a pale, silvery light over the landscape. I scanned the tree line, my heart pounding in my chest.
For a long time, there was nothing but the shifting patterns of moonlight and shadow.
I was about to dismiss it, to tell myself it was just a bear after all, when I heard another sound, much closer this time. It was the sound of something heavy moving through the underbrush, just beyond the clearing around the cabin. Snap. A thick branch broke with a sound like a pistol shot, then another. Whatever was out there, it was massive, and it wasn't being quiet. It was moving with a purpose. I stayed at the window, my eyes glued to the edge of the woods. Then, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was the distinct, metallic click of the gate on our short picket fence that separated Sarah's garden from the rest of the yard. It was a simple latch, easy enough for a person to open. But an animal? A bear would have just pushed through it, splintering the wood. This was different. This was manipulation. It was deliberate.
My mind was screaming that this was impossible, but my ears told me a different story. Something had opened our gate. I backed away from the window slowly, my breath catching in my throat. I moved to the front door, which had a small peephole. My hand trembled as I put my eye to the lens. The porch was empty. The porch swing moved gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. But then I heard sniffing. Loud, wet, sniffing sounds, right at the base of the door. It was followed by a low, whining growl, a sound of frustration. I could feel the vibrations through the thick oak door. It was right there, just inches away from me. I held my breath, praying it would just go away. The sniffing continued for what felt like an eternity, moving along the bottom of the door, then up the side, as if it was searching for a weakness, a way in. Then came the doorknob. It started to rattle, gently at first, then more forcefully. I watched in horrified disbelief as the brass knob turned, slowly, deliberately, back and forth. This wasn't an animal pawing at the door. This was something with hands, with fingers, trying to work the mechanism. It understood what a doorknob was. The implications of that simple fact were more terrifying than any growl. This thing wasn't just a brute predator. It was intelligent. It was a problem solver. It was trying to get into my house. "Frank?" Sarah's terrified whisper came from the bedroom doorway. "Get the phone," I whispered back, never taking my eye from the peephole, though I could see nothing. "Call 911. She fumbled for her cell phone on the kitchen counter. A moment later, she said, "No service, not a single bar." Of course, we were in a dead zone. We were miles from the nearest neighbor, at the end of a dirt road, with no way to call for help. We were completely and utterly on our own. The rattling at the doorknob stopped. For a moment, there was silence. I thought, maybe it gave up. Maybe it's leaving. Then a heavy, solid weight slammed against the door. The whole frame shuddered. It hit the door again, a deafening boom that echoed through the small cabin. I backed away from the door, raising the shotgun. "Sarah, get in the bathroom," I commanded. "Barricade the door." She didn't argue. She ran into the small bathroom at the back of the cabin, and I heard her dragging the heavy antique dresser in front of the door. Another slam against the front door, harder this time. I could hear the wood groaning, splintering. This thing was trying to break the door down. I chambered around, the sound of the pump action unnaturally loud in the tense silence between impacts. The assault on the front door stopped as suddenly as it began. I stood in the middle of the living room, shotgun at the ready, straining to hear. Silence. Then a scraping sound from the side of the house.
It was moving. It was circling the cabin, testing for weaknesses.
I crept to the side window and peered through the blinds. And that's when I saw it for the first time. It was only a silhouette, a monstrous shape moving against the moonlit woods. It was impossibly tall, easily 7, maybe 8 feet. Its shoulders were immense, a solid wall of muscle. But it was the proportions that were so deeply, fundamentally wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down almost to its knees. The legs were bent backwards like a dog's, but it walked upright on 2 feet. And the head was long and tapered, with pointed ears silhouetted against the moon. It was the head of a wolf, a massive predatory canine perched atop a torso that was horribly, unnervingly humanoid. My mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was a nightmare given form. It moved past the window and out of sight. I heard it at the back of the cabin now, a scratching sound, then a sharp crack. It was at the kitchen window. I rushed into the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The window over the sink was small, but it was a vulnerability. I saw long, dark fingers tipped with thick claws curl over the windowsill. The wood splintered under the pressure. The creature was trying to pry the window open. I yelled, a primal shout of defiance and terror, and it snatched its hand back. A deep, furious snarl answered me from the darkness outside. It was toying with us. Or maybe it was testing us. It moved back to the front of the house. I heard the scrape of wood on wood. I peered through the living room window again. It was on the porch. It had picked up one of the heavy oak rocking chairs and was holding it, not like an animal, but like a man would, testing its weight. Then, with a grunt of effort that I heard clearly through the wall, it hurled the chair against the side of the cabin. The impact shook the entire structure. This wasn't just mindless rage. It was tactical. It was trying to frighten us, to break our morale. Then it did something that solidified its intelligence in my mind beyond any doubt. It stepped directly in front of the door again, just out of the peephole's view. And it knocked. Not a frantic pounding, but a calm, rhythmic, 3-part knock. Knock, knock, knock. Like a neighbor stopping by for a cup of sugar. The sheer, calculated mockery of it was horrifying. It was telling us that it knew what we were. It knew our customs, our behaviors. It knew what that knock was supposed to mean. And it was twisting it into a form of psychological torture. Hours passed like this, a terrifying cycle of silence, then a sudden burst of activity. It would pound on a wall, then scrape its claws along the roof. It would let out a bone-chilling howl that was part wolf, part something else, something deeper and more guttural. At one point, I heard it dragging something heavy across the porch. I risked another look. It had torn one of Sarah's large terracotta planters from the garden and was dragging it across the wooden planks, the sound of it grating on my last nerve. It was a constant assault, both physical and psychological. It wanted us to know it was there. It wanted us to be afraid. And God help us, it was working. The longest part of the night was the dead space between 3 and 5 in the morning. The activity outside stopped completely. The silence returned, but it was 1,000 times more terrifying than it had been that afternoon. Before, it was the silence of anticipation. Now, it was the silence of a predator that has cornered its prey and is simply waiting. Waiting for us to make a mistake. Waiting for us to exhaust ourselves. Waiting for us to give up. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, shotgun across my lap, my eyes burning from staring into the darkness. I could hear Sarah crying softly in the bathroom. I was terrified, more scared than I had ever been in my life.
but a cold anger was starting to build underneath the fear. This thing was not getting into my house. It was not getting to my wife. I would die here before I let that happen. Just before dawn, when the black of the sky was just starting to soften into a deep navy blue, the final assault began. It started with a low growl from the porch. Then, without warning, the creature threw its full weight against the living room window. The outer pane of glass shattered, spraying shards across the porch. The inner pane held, but the frame buckled inwards. I saw its face then, for one clear, horrific second, pressed against the glass. The moonlight was weak, but the porch light, which we'd left on, illuminated it in a sickening yellow glow. The fur was a matted, mangy mix of black and gray, caked with mud and something darker. The muzzle was long, lined with yellowed canine teeth that were bared in a snarl.
But the eyes were not an animal's. They were a pale, luminous yellow, and they burned with a malevolent intelligence. They were looking right at me, and in them I saw not just hunger, but hatred. It was a look of pure, calculated malice. It slammed its fist against the glass again, and the inner pane cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading from the point of impact. It was going to get in. That was it. My training, my instincts, everything took over. I wasn't going to wait for it to break through. I raised the Remington, aimed just to the side of that horrifying face, and pulled the trigger. The roar of the 12-gauge inside the small cabin was deafening. The buckshot blew a hole the size of my fist through the window and the wall beside it. The creature shrieked, a sound of pain and fury that was unlike anything I have ever heard, and scrambled back from the window.
I heard it fall off the porch with a heavy thud, followed by a series of enraged snarls and howls as it crashed away through the underbrush. I stood there, my ears ringing, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. I quickly reloaded, my hands shaking uncontrollably now that the immediate threat was gone. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 20. The woods were silent once more. The first pale hints of sunrise were beginning to filter through the trees. The long night was finally over. I went to the bathroom door. "Sarah," I said, my voice hoarse. "It's gone. I think it's gone." I heard the dresser being scraped away from the door, and she emerged, her face tear-streaked and pale. We held each other for a long time, right there in the middle of our wrecked living room. As soon as there was enough light to see, we got out of there. I didn't even bother to pack. We just grabbed our wallets and keys. I took one last look at the cabin. The front door was splintered and bowed inward. The living room window was shattered. The porch was a disaster zone, the rocking chair smashed to pieces, dirt and broken pottery everywhere. And on the wooden planks, near the edge where it had fallen, there were dark, glistening drops of what looked like blood. I didn't investigate. I just wanted to be gone. We drove the truck faster than I should have on that gravel road, fishtailing around the corners, not stopping until we hit the paved county highway. The sun was up now, shining on a perfectly normal, peaceful-looking world. It felt like a dream, a horrible, vivid nightmare. But the shattered window and the ringing in my ears were real. We didn't go home. We drove straight to the Hickman County Sheriff's Department in Centerville. The deputy on duty was a young kid, barely old enough to shave. He looked at us, two disheveled, terrified-looking old people who had just walked in off the street at 7 in the morning, with a mixture of boredom and suspicion. I told him my name, told him I was retired from Davidson County, and then I tried to explain what had happened. I tried to sound calm, rational,
like the professional lawman I had been for 3 decades. But the words came out in a jumble. I talked about the tracks, the doorknob, the siege on our cabin. I showed him the pictures of the prints on my phone. He listened with a patient, patronizing smile. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Henderson," he said, drawing my name out. "It sounds like you and your wife had a real scare. We get bears out in that area all the time. Big ones. They can be real persistent when they smell food." "This wasn't a bear," I said, my voice rising. "A bear doesn't turn a doorknob. A bear doesn't knock." He just nodded. "Right. Well, I'll file a report. We can send a patrol car out to your property later today to take a look around for this bear." He wrote a few things down on a form, his pen scratching loudly in the quiet office.
He was dismissing me.
He was treating me like a crazy old man spooked by a shadow. I was about to lose my temper, to really let this kid have it, when an older man stepped out of a back office. He had a graying mustache and the weary eyes of a career cop. His name tag read, Sheriff Thompson. He'd clearly overheard our conversation. "Let me handle this, son," he said to the young deputy, then turned to me. "Frank Henderson? I remember hearing your name. You were a good cop." He led me and Sarah into his office and closed the door. "Now," he said, sitting down behind his cluttered desk, "tell me exactly what you saw, and don't leave anything out." I told him everything again, from the silence in the woods to the face in the window. He listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. He didn't interrupt. He just let me talk.
When I was done, he was quiet for a long moment, steepling his fingers under his chin.
"I'm going to be straight with you, Frank," he said finally. "Officially, my deputy is right. What you saw was a bear. A large, unusually aggressive black bear. That's what my report is going to say. It's clean, it's simple. Nobody asks any questions." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Unofficially, you're not the first person to call in a report like this from out in that stretch of woods. We get one every few years. People see things that don't make sense. Tracks that are too big. Things moving on 2 legs that shouldn't be. Most people, we write them off as drunks or crackpots. But you're different. You know what you saw." He paused, looking from me to Sarah. "My advice to you? Sell the cabin. Don't go back out there. There are some places in this world that are older and wilder than we think, and some things that are best left alone. You and your wife were lucky. You survived. Don't push that luck." And that was it. No investigation, no follow-up. Just a veiled warning from a tired old sheriff who knew more than he was willing to say. We drove home in silence. We put the cabin on the market the next week and sold it at a significant loss to a timber company that just wanted the land. We never told them why we were selling. We never went back, not even to get our things. We just walked away from it. It's been 3 years. We live in a suburb now with streetlights and neighbors and the constant hum of traffic. It's a different kind of quiet, a man-made quiet, and I find it comforting. But the fear never really leaves you. Sarah still has nightmares. Sometimes she wakes up screaming. I don't sleep much myself.
I spend most nights in the living room chair, watching the street, a shotgun loaded with buckshot resting on the floor beside me. I see that face in the window sometimes when I close my eyes. Those intelligent, hateful yellow eyes. I don't know what that thing was. I've spent hours online reading stories, looking at blurry photographs. People call it Dogman, Bigfoot, 100 other names. They're all just labels for the unknown. All I know is that it was real. It was intelligent. And it was malevolent. It wanted to hurt us. It wanted to get inside. I was a cop for 35 years. I believed the world operated on a set of rules. There were bad people, sure, but they were understandable. They were human. What I learned that night is that the world is much bigger and much stranger than we think. We build our little towns and our houses with their locked doors, and we pretend we're safe. We pretend we're at the top of the food chain.
But out there in the deep, dark woods, where the cell service dies and the roads turn to dirt, there are things that have been there for a very long time. Things that watch us from the shadows. Things that know what a doorknob is for. So if you ever find yourself in a place like that, and the woods go suddenly, unnaturally silent, leave. Just get in your car and drive away. Don't wait to find out why. Don't try to rationalize it. Just go. Because you are not alone, and you are not welcome. You are trespassing. And some things, they don't take kindly to trespassers.